Happy Monday, everybody out there in Facebook land. Welcome to the You Are Worthy Network. I cannot believe it's Monday. I cannot believe it's May the 4th. I can't believe that I'm getting old. Time just keeps flying by. But I want to welcome you to the network. And if you're one of the ones watching today that hasn't watched one of our interviews, and you're saying, what is this You Are Worthy Network about? I want to try to articulate that ever so briefly. But if I'm not ever so briefly, forgive me because I am a pastor. So, we get a little long winded sometimes. You Are Worthy Network was created out of mindset work that I did and still doing the last year and a half, 2 years, where I discovered I had been lying to myself about my worth, and I knew it wasn't true here, but I couldn't get it that short distance physically, but long distance mentally to right here. And I knew where it came from, I knew the origins. And as I started to push back against the border bullies and quit drinking the Kool-Aid, I said, you know what? I am worthy. And I want to help other people in that whole family. Limited thinking, lack of self love, lack of self worth, imposter syndrome, that whole family, right? Because we all deal with it at different times. And so I created the You Are Worthy Network as a way of giving back and giving, hopefully, you guys a little hope, a little encouragement to keep going. And I love to remind you guys all the time. I know I sound like a broken record, but I love the record. Your story's not over yet. Your story's not over yet. And wherever you're at on the journey, it's just a chapter. There's more to come. And so I interview incredible people, like the guest I'm about to introduce you to, and we talk about their story a little bit. 45, 50 minutes, we talk about their story a little bit. And you'll find a lot of successful people coming on here, and that's awesome. And we want to talk about their successes. We want to praise God with them. But we also want to talk about what they've overcome and maybe about a season where they didn't feel so worthy. Because you know what? They're human too. And they're overcoming and they're still fighting their mindset. And we all are trying to encourage one another along the way. That's, in brief, or not, what the You Are Worthy Network is all about. Now, having said that, if my phone will cooperate, I want to introduce you to Lindsey. Lindsey Hartz is the CEO of Ignite Faith Media, where she helps faith fueled authors, speakers, and thought leaders turn their message into a movement, a book into a business, and their work into lasting kingdom impact. She works with those called to bring needed change to church, cultural, and spiritual leadership, guiding them to clarify their message, build aligned marketing systems, and grow an audience that leads to sustainable income and influence without relying on platform pressure or industry gatekeeping. With a background in corporate marketing and more than 15 years in the Christian publishing industry, Lindsey offers strategic consulting, robust systems, and a faithful soul, and faithful soul care to those called to write, speak, and lead with purpose. I love all of that. Lindsey, so good to have you here. Welcome to the You Are Worthy Network.
Thanks for having me. And faithful soul applies. It's not just soul care for the people I work with. It's living out my calling, caring for
Mm.
others too. So
Yeah, that's so good. That's so needed for sure. And I'm tempted, especially when I read things about church and leadership cultures, having been so immersed in that for a number of years now. I'm tempted to jump right to that, but I won't. We'll ease into it. Lindsey, one of the blessings of having a group that God has blown up big time is I've got people that are eventually going to watch this interview from around the world, And so I never want people to assume where people are from, but tell us what part of the world you're coming from today.
I am in Nashville, Tennessee, in the United States.
Yep. And Lindsay and I are from the same home city. I lived in Nashville for almost 30 years, and I still call it home, though I've been gone a while now. I've been gone 13 years almost, and it's changed a lot, but I still get back 2 or 3 times a year. And it's an incredible city with an incredible heartbeat. Lots of changes for sure. But so tell us, Lindsay, in Nashville, Tennessee, who do you do life with? Tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, gosh, I have been married, partnered. I'm at that age where I have to really think about like how many years exactly we have been together and been married. But my husband and I met in 1995. So that's, I don't know, 30-ish years, 30, 31 years. We've been married for 28 of those. We have two, I like to call them baby adult children, although I don't know that they would appreciate that. But for us, they're 22 and 24. So it's just kind of an interesting season of life as they're navigating into their adulthood outside of our home. And we have a grandbaby on the way, our first grandbaby. So that's my immediate family. Lots of friends and peers here. Nashville is actually a really great entrepreneurial city that we didn't actually know when we moved here. So a lot of really great ministries and businesses here, and just a church that we love. So it's a great place to be and a great season of life.
Yeah, well, congratulations on the grandbaby coming. That's awesome.
Thank you.
And I relate because my wife and I have known each other for 30, almost 33 years, and we've been married for 30 this summer. So kind of we're in that same arena as far as time goes with that. That's awesome. You know, it's interesting what you just said about Nashville and being an entrepreneur city. I've been telling guests lately, my perception in doing a lot of interviews and being blessed to be connected with a lot of people, there are pockets of cities. Now, I mean, I'm sure it's all over, but there seems to be heavier concentration in some areas. I've noticed Phoenix is that way, Dallas is that way, Tampa, Sarasota is that way, and Nashville certainly that way. I'm sure I'm missing some, not trying to offend anybody, but those four really in my circles, I come across that a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you could add Austin to the list.
Hmm.
I'm not sure what it is about Nashville. I mean, it's a very creative, music-oriented city. So I think that was probably the start of the roots. But over the years, a lot of people have moved here that are on ministerial or business paths in the online space, especially. So it's a really great energy to be around. Working outside the corporate 9 to 5 has its ups and downs. So it's always really great to find people who are living kind of the similar path in life that understand the nuances of that and can help, be kind of a cloud of witnesses and support, as you're moving forward in whatever you're trying to do. So it's definitely been a great experience here.
Yeah. So your kids are 22 and 24.
Yes.
Are they still close by?
Yeah, actually, my daughter's within about 2 hours, which is a little sad, but also at least it's not, 8 states away.
Yeah.
Easily drivable, so I'm grateful for that. And she is the one that's having the baby. So we have about, I think, 3 months left before the little one arrives. My son is still local here. He just graduated from college and is on the job hunt. So
Okay. Yeah. 2 hours is not too bad.
it's
When that little baby comes, you'd like to be a little closer, but that's not bad.
yeah.
And so what do you guys like to do for fun?
Oh, I don't know. My husband's a better person to ask that. He's the fun and adventure. I'm the practicality, logic, rules. Um, but I will say there's a good compliment there. I think that he brings out some of the fun in me that's not super, I don't know, natural to me. Um, so if I had to really answer the question with him, I have a lot of adventure, a lot of exploring things that I wouldn't normally do myself. And I think he's definitely passed that on to the kids. I'm usually just along for the ride and thinking, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought it would be. Personally, I'm a little bit of a introvert. I like to be home. I like to have kind of that security and comfort in home, an environment that's conducive to like conversation and growth. There's a sign on my wall downstairs. I was just looking at it today, thinking, oh, it's a whole different season. But it was a sign I kept for years while my kids were young and now older. And it says, the most important work you will ever do within the walls of your home. And that is something that was very true, throughout their childhood. It's something that I really had held steady to. So my notion of fun was communication and connection and conversation and play where you could really connect with one another um, versus anything else. So it's interesting. I'm answering this question thinking in the back of my head, I don't know how to really define if I know how to have fun, but maybe that's normal. Maybe that's normal for a mom who's entering into the empty nest stage and needs to find a new sense of play and wonder for myself that isn't tied to my kids.
That is interesting. And as you say that, I was thinking, gosh, if I asked my wife that same question, what would she say?
Yeah.
Because we're not empty net. Well, we're easing there. I've got one out of the house. I've got one that graduates in 5 days from high school. And then we've got our youngest is going into his sophomore year. And so she would probably say, what is that? I'm in the throes of it.
Yeah.
Although she does have a horse that's about 15 minutes from here, and she does go see him every day, and she does do some training with him. He's still got one more year until she can actually ride him. But I think that's an honest answer for a mom that's been in the throes of it for a long time.
Well, and it is interesting too that this whole group is about worth. I think in conjunction with raising my kids, I have run a business from home almost that entire time as well. So it is a little interesting. My husband and I have had conversations, especially the last couple of months, where I'm like, I don't know what to do on the other side, right? And while business and ministry is a beautiful, wonderful thing, for me especially, I've noticed the last couple of years, maybe the last year to two, where it had kind of consumed my identity, right?
Hmm.
So it is really interesting where you pour yourself into the things that matter to you. I mean, I love writing, I love reading, I love books and the gifts that they can be for people, especially in seasons of hurt where they need hope or healing. I think it's a really beautiful conduit to faith when you're struggling to see it in your day-to-day life. It's true for me. It's true for many other people that read books. But at the same time, my whole identity cannot be wrapped around I'm a mother, I'm a business owner, I help others do all of these amazing things. And at some point in your life, you have to kind of make sure you're taking care of yourself, right? Your soul. So that is kind of the season that I'm in right now for sure.
Yeah, but I love tell us again what your sign downstairs says.
The most important work you will ever do is within the walls of your home.
It's so true because you can have all the success in business, all the money in the bank, but if we fail at home, we have failed our creator and we have failed our greatest mission in life. So I love that reminder.
One thing I will also point out is I was thinking, oh, that doesn't necessarily apply anymore in the way that I always took it to mean. One thing that I hope that my children take with them is that home is they always have home with us, but whenever we show up to them, wherever they are, we want it to be a reminder of home, right? That they have that safety and that security. So it was interesting thinking, okay, well, the walls of my home have changed because my kids are no longer, for lack of a better word, confined there, right? So it's just something that I'm trying to take into, whatever the next season looks like. My son's looking to move out on his own officially because he's been with us while he's trying to look for a job. My daughter obviously is out of state, but anytime we go and see and interact with either one of them, we want to have a remembrance of that safety, that security, that sense of care and connection we had in our home and take it to them. And then also, I mean, we all have parents that we love and sometimes had hard times with. And so, especially when you enter into raising your own children, there are things that you want to take with you from your parents, from your home life, and there are things you don't want to take with you. So it'll be really interesting to see, especially with my daughter, what she keeps and what she discards is not right for her family. And that's well and good. That's the way it should be, right? But I'm really excited to see her create her own version of what home means for her and her family and her children, along with my son, who right now is not interested in marriage or kids, and that's perfectly fine. So his version of home looks more like connection with friends, connection with career. So it's going to be just an interesting season of life for sure.
We have two distinct prayer lists here. Your daughter
Yeah.
obviously needs prayers for being a new mom and how that's going to affect her and how that's going to affect her dynamic with her husband.
Yeah.
A lot more to go with that. And then your son, we need to pray for him simply for the Nashville housing market or renting market, because that's a whole
Well,
nother challenge.
luckily, he has incredible roommate relationships from college. They're all still very connected. So he would be moving in with one of his college roommates. So yeah, it's definitely one of the only ways they can. I wouldn't say the only ways they can afford, but just like everywhere else, it's become very, very, very expensive. So I'm grateful he has great relationships with friends where he can actually move in with a friend and can kind of continue that care and support and connection he had in college. I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, that's a big blessing. My joke, but it's not totally a joke, is like I said at the beginning that we moved out of Nashville in 13 years ago. We did that because we're in the ministry and God's called us to different places. But like he'd have to make things happen provision wise because we can't afford to go back to Nashville now. But
Yeah.
that's a whole other conversation. Lindsay, I want to take you back in time. Did you see yourself 17, 18 years old, senior in high school? Did you see yourself then getting into corporate marketing, Christian publishing? What did 18-year-old Lindsay want to do?
Uh, 18-year-old Lindsay had absolutely no idea what she wanted to do with her life. Without going into too many details, I do have some just, difficult circumstances and situations in how and where I was raised. So when I was 18, I was actually on my own. I had been told to leave the house that I was in. So I didn't really have a sense of security. I also had been a little sheltered, so I didn't really have a really true understanding of what it was going to be like to enter into the world as an adult. So I definitely didn't feel equipped, and did not feel like I had support around me because I literally did not. So when I was 18, I was entering into a college situation on my own with just some friends and their parents kind of helping shepherding me a little bit. My most prominent memory of that age was a little bit of overwhelm, just not understanding how I was gonna make it, I guess, if that makes sense on my own.
Mhm.
But so many years later, I mean, that was a good 30 something years ago, I can definitely see, not that I wish the situation had happened the way it did. I wouldn't wish on anyone to be out of their home at 18 without any support. But I can also see how it really developed a sense of resilience in me and honestly, plain old stubbornness. I was going to prove everybody wrong, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I didn't really have a sense of what career I wanted to be in. The degree that I was pursuing was actually in elementary education and supporting kids that had, trauma in their life. That's actually what I wanted to pursue. And uh, I wound up leaning more towards the business marketing world. Again, at the time, I would have told you, oh, I don't really like kids. It's kind of amusing. Looking back on it, I think it was very difficult for me to sit in classes, listening to stories of kids that had, been harmed or had difficult circumstances because I came from that background, but I did not have any support or resources. I'd never gone to therapy. So I think it was pretty triggering for me actually to kind of sit and listen to those stories. So I just pivoted to a career that felt a little more emotionally safe, right? And I chose business and eventually marketing. Interestingly, business was like the ideal back then. And I mean, we are older than, not dirt, but we are older than the internet, correct? We
I
are
am
older
for
than social
sure.
media. We are older than, how the internet is used today, how social media, again, social media wasn't even a thing until many years into my career. So I think for me, business felt safe because it was always held up as this ideal back then. You need to go to a business, you need to get a degree, you need to have a decent income, you need to have the house and the 2.5 kids and the dog in the yard. It was kind of this American dream that was touted as the only path in order to succeed or overcome, especially in my situation, difficult circumstances or a childhood that wasn't necessarily filled with a lot of possessions or security, things like that. So I chose it because it felt stable, basically. Marketing came along later, in that was just the career path I was placed in when I first started working at a corporation. And it really resonated to me because I love storytelling. And even though we were storytelling products and services that weren't necessarily, in my opinion, of great benefit to people, auto loans and mortgages. Okay. I mean, again, yes, there's a little bit of that American dream there, but it's not like the work I'm doing today, right? But what really resonated with me was the storytelling, was leaning into what are the hopes and desires and dreams of people, and how do we show them a path to get there? That's what marketing has always been to me, is really just telling a story, telling a true story, right? Based on hope and aspiration and reality, not on pain or false urgency or lack. I've always been more of what I call a relationship marketer. Um, in that I don't believe that we should convince people they need something in a negative way. I believe we can show them what's possible, right? So that's how I've always approached marketing. So again, my career was not something I chose. It wasn't something I always longed for. If I look even further back, I probably would have said I wanted to be a librarian, which I kind of am, if you think about it in that context.
Fascinating. So
Mm,
so you did the corporate thing for several years.
yeah.
What's the story behind going? I'm assuming, tell me if I'm wrong, you went straight from corporate world to Christian publishing. How did that come about?
Not straight at all, actually.
Okay.
So out of gosh, the year, I don't know about you, but the years are so run it together at this point. So okay, 1995 is when I met my husband. I actually met him at college, at the college that I was referencing. And 1998, we got married and we started working at this corporation. We both worked at the same company. He was in a completely different area, and I was in more kind of the business side of it. Over the years, just through opportunities, I kind of worked my way up through, just regular, like customer service oriented work into like, um, I can't think of the word, like issues, problem solving. People were having
Mhm.
problems with their accounts. We solved the problems. And a lot of times we had to deal with the volatile nature of people being really hurt, upset, concerned about whatever was going on with their account. And then I eventually wound up in kind of sales operations and marketing in that company. So that was the corporate career. 2006-ish, we just had some really difficult personal circumstances happen, that led me to leave that corporate job. So I resigned. I think my last day was in like January of 2007. And after that, we had some other like tangent stuff going on with one of our kids. Our son is now diagnosed as autistic. At the time, I don't know if they didn't have language for it. I don't know. There were like different levels of autism, and so he's kind of what they call high functioning. But back then, some of the behaviors that kind of came out of the blue, they thought it was, they labeled him so many different things, oppositional defiant disorder and ADHD, all these things. But what it meant is I had come home and he then was lovingly ejected out of childcare because he was having a lot of symptoms and stuff like that that they couldn't handle. So I think my intention was to eventually go find another job, but because of the circumstance with my son, I never did.
Hmm.
I wound up staying home with him. Not, I don't regret that. I mean, he was very young. My kids were probably around 3 and 5 during this season, and I just started having kind of this series of first identity crisis. Like when you work, practically your whole adult life for a corporate position and position money and all that kind of stuff. When I came home, it was pretty jarring from an identity perspective. I remember literally thinking, gosh, well, who am I without my career? Which is interesting. We'll talk about this more in the interview because that seems to be a recurring theme in my life. My struggle with understanding who I am and what my worth is if I'm not doing something for other people, whether it's professionally or whether it's raising my kids. But it's also a very real reality. It was kind of my first eye-opening of, gosh, my whole identity is tied up in this job. And I didn't know quite how to be a mom. I know my kids were older, but remember, I had a lot of childhood stuff. And so while I raised them decently at that time, I was pretty disconnected from them because I had never really navigated my own childhood. So a lot of my own childhood was affecting how I was parenting and just disconnect. And I would say that I always think of the nature versus nurture comment when I think about when my kids were very young. I did not know how to nurture them because of the way I was raised. I just knew how to model being a mom and not what I wanted to take forward. So, all to say, there was a couple of years where I was trying to figure all that out. Like this career was that I worked for was not there anymore. I was now trying to figure out how to raise my kids in a healthy way. And we just had a lot of turmoil going on. And so this is also the kind of the time that we entered into church. Again, we had not really been in church most of our life, my husband or I, and church was really appealing to us. I mean, it was very, oh, this is a really cool environment. I remember walking into church for the first time around this year that we're talking about and thinking, gosh, this is it felt such a place of safety. Again, safety is a theme in my story. So is identity. You'll hear me talk about these things a lot as a young woman. And it just felt like there was something hopeful there that was coming in to something that was missing in our life. I don't know how else to explain that to us. I just felt very out of sorts, and church felt like a solution, a possible solution. So, in terms of the business that I have now, I didn't really intend to start a business. I was home, I was raising my kids, we were going to church, I was navigating these increasing feelings of loss of identity and worth, and didn't really know where my story was supposed to go from there. And I was going through a lot of therapy at the time, and one of my therapists asked me what I used to do as a child, to have hope. And I'm like, well, I used to write, I used to read all the time. And I just loved the stories that there was a story out there that was different than the one that I was living, right? So we started talking more and more about why I love to write and the types of books that I read as a kid. And so I started bringing that back into my life. When you asked me earlier, what do I do for fun? I'm like, can I say read books? Does that count? It doesn't
Absolutely.
seem like fun to anybody but me. I am a weirdly prolific reader. I mean, when I was a kid, I probably read all the traditional classics and understood them by the time I was like 11 or 12. And these are serious books, Jane Eyre, Great Expectations. I used to, back when encyclopedias existed, I would memorize encyclopedias, and I would memorize the dictionary. And one of the funniest long-term uh, arguments my husband and I ever got in. It was really amusing. We were probably in our 30s, and we were trying to navigate how to communicate well. And I don't know, getting upset about something. And he's like, hold on. I'm like, what? And he walked out of the room and brought a dictionary with him because apparently when I get a little feisty, I start spitting out words that nobody knows what they mean but me. So anyway, that's kind of a funny little humorous moment in our marriage now. Whenever I'm getting a little too feisty, he'll like pull out the dictionary just as a moment of like levity of to remind me, hey, I'm here and I'm listening, but can you please use words that are not like 18 syllables long, in a casual disagreement. So it's
At least now you know he's not just walking away. He's going to get the
oh yeah,
dictionary.
yeah, it was very, very funny. I have a lot of humor for that moment, but I think for me, what I'm trying to say is words were always integral in my life. I taught myself to read at a very young age. I read prolifically. I actually can speed read. People are always asking me, like, how do you read so fast? Because I can. I don't know. I don't know why I can, but I can. I can read books probably in, half to 75% the time it takes other people to read, and I can actually retain it.
Wow.
Um, I don't think it's a specific gift. I literally think it's because that's all I ever did. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Learned how to do it.
I just learned how to do it.
Hmm.
So having, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just I want you to feel like you're not totally alone for a
Ah,
second. I didn't read a lot like you did as a kid. I read some, but it was mostly biographies, little history, biographies about my favorite sports heroes, things like that. I wouldn't say an avid reader until I became a Christian 22 years ago. Then it
yeah,
opened up a whole new world of reading, and you can't see it on my screen, but I have two bookshelves on either side of my computer, and then I have another one in the back of my office. And about 7, 8 years ago, my wife said, "You got to stop buying books." And what she meant was not the actual buying; it was not just the bookshelves were running out of space. I had stacks going on the floor.
yeah,
And she said, "You're going to have to go to Kindle." And I
yeah,
was like, "No, no, no." And I fought the Kindle thing for so long. And I got Kindle. I was like, "Oh, you can highlight it. Oh, I love the, oh, I've got them all in the same place. I love this."
yeah.
Now, to bring this all the way forward, I've gotten really busy in the last year and a half.
Mhm.
And I was reading, I don't know if it's not a competition. I was probably reading 50 books a year. No, probably more at one point, probably 70 books a year at one point for about 3 or 4 years in a row.
Yeah.
And then it's slowed way down when we moved to Memphis. And then
Mhm.
it slowed down even more the last year and a half. And then I bought a few books around Christmas time, said, okay, I'm going to buy some hardbacks, just 5 or 6. And I'm looking over at that stack right now, Lindsay, of 5 or 6. And I do read the Bible every day, and I
Mhm.
do read a devotional. But those 5 or 6 books, I've opened one of them, and I'm only about 40 pages in. And so why do I share that with you? I'm mourning my books.
Yeah.
You're making me want to get back in them again. So anyway, sorry.
I think part of it too is understanding. I don't know why some people lean toward reading and some people don't, right? For me, I mean, it really has to do with my love for storytelling. I just love reading, and I also watch TV to a certain extent. But it's interesting what I watch. So I read way more than I watch TV, right? Reading is like a hobby to me. It's not just something that's fun. I actually truly enjoy it. I would rather read a book than do just about anything else, right?
Mhm.
And so there can be some detriment to that. Like I actually have to remind myself, oh, there's like a whole life, like a real life, outside the walls of my home. But it's also how I process and how I understand the world. And so again, I think it started for me at a very young age, right? And especially when I was going to therapy, and the therapist kind of reminded me, hey, well, it's not just that you love to read, because reading can be a form of escapism, just like watching TV or sports or whatever. And she's like, well, what do you read? And when we started looking at it, there were themes, which it had never occurred to me that I was constantly picking up the same type of work. So for me, again, I think I leaned a lot towards the classics, especially because they were subversive writers. There, a lot of the people that were writing a lot of these books were writing them under duress in times where they couldn't publicly say the things that they were wanting to say without punishment, male or female. They were talking a lot about, good versus evil, right versus wrong, looking at people as less than human or looking at them as completely human. So there were very common themes in a lot of the books that I read as a child. Um, Going into adulthood, again, when I was going through therapy, I probably started reading more of what you would call your traditional Christian work. I mean, to be honest, I didn't even know it really existed. Again, we walked into church in our 30s without a lot of context to church. You weren't really raised Christian, didn't really grow up in church seriously. There were some forays in and out of different religions, but it was never something that was very serious or set in the home as like, this is a way of life, right? So when my husband and I walked into church in our 30s, it's kind of a culture shock.
Mhm.
Um, and it was the first time I think I'd ever opened the Bible, which is interesting that I was never really exposed to the Bible in that capacity my whole life until I was in my 30s. And so, having said that, um, when I was walking through therapy and kind of after leaving this career and kind of tracing like my love affair with books and the Bible, the words that were in all these books that were helping giving me a perspective on life, they all shaped me. They gave me kind of the next step forward in whatever season or situation I was facing, right? And the business that I own now, I've owned it for officially for 15 years. So there was a gap, between 2007-ish when I left the corporate career. And I would say the official date of this business starting is probably around 2011. It wasn't that I wasn't doing things in between those years, but a lot of what I was doing was really figuring out who I was and what I wanted to do with my life, but most importantly, what God wanted me to do with it. So I started going to a lot of conferences as I was writing in therapy and navigating church. And I met a lot of friends in the writing circuit. Again, back then, this was kind of pre-social media, and it was a little weird to go off to a conference and meet strangers because they might be murderers. That's how our generation was raised, right? Don't go meet strangers off the internet. They might be murderers. So I still remember the first writing conference I went to. My husband kept messaging me. He must have been either texting me or paging me. I cannot remember because it was so many years ago. He's like, "Are you alive? Like, are these real people?" And yes, they were real women, real people. I'm still friends with them today. We still laugh that my husband was like really worried about me because it was a little weird back then to go meet
It
people from the
was.
internet. But anyway, the more conferences I went to from a writing perspective, I kept having conversations with women who were faithful writers. Blogging was a thing, was starting to kind of enter
Mhm.
into the space. Blogging was kind of like an online journal back then. And just telling your story in an honest, vulnerable way on a platform like the internet was something that was very new. And so all the conversations we were having were, I want to be honest and open and vulnerable, but the industry is changing, right? If you're trying to write a book with a publisher, now they want you to have an online presence. And what does that even mean? In a lot of ways, it's like right now what we're experiencing, to give people context who weren't around back then, it's like what we're seeing with AI now, right? Blogging, the
Mm.
internet, social media, everything that was disrupted by that is kind of what we're seeing now being disrupted with the introduction of AI. And so it was just very like, how do you keep up with it? How do you understand how to use it? How do you stay human and connected in this new space? And so a lot of my writer friends would say, we love the art of writing, but we hate marketing. And that was the first kind of aha moment I had. I was like, well, why? Why do you hate marketing? Because to me, both of them made sense. And it was the first time I realized that I'm a creative writer by nature, but I learned to be logical and analytical from a marketing perspective from my career. And I thought, well, I
Mhm.
can help them with that. So people always ask me how I started my business, and it was literally that. It was that moment of going, well, I can help you do that. Why don't I just help you? And I did spend some time in prayer of, God, is this what I need to do? And God's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, what's the plan? Silence. No plan. Like it was literally like, yes, do this. And I kind of had to figure it out myself. I just knew I needed to be obedient. So I often say that I did not have a business plan. I had an obedience plan. It was just doing what God told me to do
Mm.
without plan, without steps, without really a true understanding of what I was getting myself into. I am one of those rare people that did not start in the publishing or book world from a professional standpoint. I had nothing to do with any of that. I just had a love for the word and love for books and adjacent skill of marketing strategy through my corporate job, which again had nothing to do with book publishing. I was just in the right time at the right place and did what God told me to do. So I went to several of those friends and I'm like, okay, I've spent some time in prayer and God's told me to start a business about books. And they're like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I don't know. Literally have no idea, but let's figure it out together. And that's exactly what I did with like 10 of my friends. So a lot of them had books releasing. And so we spent time just figuring out what was stressing them out, what was causing them, hangups or holdups as they were being asked to enter into this online marketing space by their publishers. And I just filled that gap. Um, and 15 years later, I'm still doing it.
So let's camp there for a minute.
Yeah.
And by the way, I love what you said. I didn't have a business plan, but I had an obedience plan. That's gold right there. I love that. Um, let's say I have a manuscript that is 90% done,
Mhm.
and you and I run into each other, we're introduced to each other, we're having a conversation, and somehow that gets brought up. What could you potentially do for somebody like me that is in that position? Walk me through what you and your company does.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved over the years. I think in the beginning, the business was modeled as an agency. So I was hired directly by publishers, by the publishers that publish the books. So we often created marketing campaigns and managed book releases for authors on in the online space specifically. So years ago, it was very much, okay, I'm an author, I have a book. We're going to hire Lindsey to help them communicate with their audience about the book release and mobilize that audience to share about it on their behalf, right?
Hmm.
So anybody who's on here who's ever been part of a launch team or a street team for a book, that was kind of what the early part of the business was in the beginning, kind of pre-pandemic. When COVID happened, it kind of disrupted so much about our life, but specifically in my business, there were a lot of projects being put on hold or paused by publishers because there was not any knowledge of when the pandemic was going to end, right? So it affected things like authors being able to go out and speak or present about their book. It prevented publishers from being in the office, to do the tangential work. Online work and interviews like this weren't actually as much of a thing even like 5 years ago. I was aware of it because I had kind of run my business like that, but I was aware of it because I finished my master's degree online back in a time when it was considered weird that you were online finishing your and I'm like, what's the big deal? It was really efficient. So again, if you really stop and think about it, there's so much about the way we interact with one another online that has shifted dramatically just in the last 10 years, not even the last 20 years. So contracts were getting paused or canceled from the publisher. At the same time, we had again some personal identity. If you think about it, it was like this business I had built was suddenly not doing anything because there were no clients, right? Paper was expensive, ink was expensive. Nobody could travel or promote their books. So the publishers were like, yeah, we're not going to we're just going to pause everything, which means our whole
Mm.
business model was paused. So that was probably one of the other major identity shifts I had is I feel like in hindsight, I was like, God, my business has finally made it. It's not easy to run a business, right? It's a beautiful, wonderful gift, but it's also there are so many highs and lows to having to wear all the hats, to managing the money and the expenses and finding clients. It is a lot, right? And to have it all kind of seemingly disappear, not overnight, but over a couple of months was pretty jarring for me personally. But I also remember thinking, okay, what is the possibility here, right? And there's always possibility, even in the face of what seems hopeless. And for me, that meant, well, the publishers aren't hiring, but the authors still have to do their job.
Mhm.
How can I help them directly outside of the publishing system? So it actually shifted the business completely differently into what I do now, to answer your question. So right now, when people come my way or I meet them at events or conferences, number one, it wouldn't just randomly come up. I would ask them. I mean, I'm Lindsay. I help authors grow their audience and launch books and monetize their message. Do you happen to be writing a book? How can I help you? Like, I literally have those conversations all the time,
Mhm.
because most people who are in the author, speaker, thought leadership space at some point or another are writing a book or want to write a book, right? So it's just part of my conversation when I meet people. Because I do believe books can be published for other people to support them, but sometimes books are written for yourself, right? To help you process what you've
Mhm.
experienced. And from a faith perspective, to help you process your journey with God through it. So sometimes those books are not necessarily always for public consumption, which is interesting.
Mhm.
So, having said that, I mean, if you want me to answer it practically, I help authors, reach the right audience for the books that they're meant to write. I help them with the kind of practicality of how do you launch and market that book. And then I help them with the how do you build kind of a monetization or income model around the book intellectual property so they can have a sustainable business. So it's not just I have a book coming out. How do I get people to share about it anymore? It's now how do I help these authors, speakers, and thought leaders build a ministry or a mission-based business around the book IP so that we can have a legacy impact beyond just one book. We want these messages to help people for generations to come.
I would think that that is fascinating work. Does it still light you up?
Yes, it does. Yeah. I think the capacity is a little different. When I was working directly with the publishers, I mean, we were working on projects so quickly. If like, I mean, projects were coming in, we'd be doing like 5, 8, 10 book launches a month. The work has slowed down in a good way. So the
Hmm.
projects that I'm a part of now, it's not just legacy work for the authors, it's legacy impact for me personally in my own spiritual walk. Like most of my clients, I'm thinking of the people I have right now, most of them have been with me over a year and a half at this point. We've been working on projects. So it's not like they came in for 8 weeks and then they were gone. Um, so yeah, it lights me up because I think it's depth over width, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yep.
I think also it's just the season of life I'm in. I mean, I have been there, done that with trying to grow and scale and succeeded in creating a wildly profitable business. But I think what I lost of myself during that time period was my desire for connection, and my desire to really pour into people and help them shape something that lasts again beyond ourselves. And that's kind of what I was able to regain during the pandemic time and going, well, what is possible? Well, what is possible is I don't have to work with 300 authors a year. I can work with, a handful, maybe 20, 25 a year, and really help them build something that's going to last. And that's what I've been doing ever since the pandemic.
Well, it sounds like it's a lot more to the relationship too. I'm imagining
Yeah.
that somebody that had a book come out in 2022 that's ready to do another one, and I'm sure you're hoping this too, that they would again look to work with you again with their new project, right?
Well, yeah, we tend to work on the body of work, not just a single project.
Hmm.
Some people do come in and out. Like I have one particular client that took like a 6-month pause to work on something else that had nothing to do with what we were doing. together, and then they're going to come back, actually this month. So it does allow a little bit of an ebb and flow for people, but some people just like to stay because we're working on anything that might relate to growing that audience, launching their books, monetizing their business. And then, of course, because I work with Christian authors, all of it is about kingdom impact, right? And so
Mhm.
sometimes that work is not the practicality of what you and I are talking about. Sometimes it's, well, how do we know we're writing the book that God wants us to write? Right? How is our mission and our business the same this year as it was last year? My mission changed, right? Even though the mandate from God is very clear, help people see God through books. That has never changed, right? But my role in it has changed, right? When you look at like working
Mm.
with publishers or working directly with authors, or my role is shifting a little bit going forward. Nothing's wrong with that. And honestly, we need to give ourselves as creators the grace and space to grow and evolve. Like what we do last year or 5 years ago is not what we do forever. It's just really paying attention to what God wants us to do. And again, being obedient to it.
Oh, so good. Tell folks, let's say we have somebody listening that is a first-time author or an author that has not heard specifically about what you do. Where could they find you and learn more about what you do?
I have a website. Don't we all have websites now?
Of course.
My company is called Ignite Faith Media, for very obvious reasons. If you've been listening to this interview, like I said, I believe books are transformational. They're a conduit of connection and conversation that are sometimes a little less intense or scary or overwhelming or sometimes judgment filling than the Bible, right? So many people that come across my world, again, a lot of my authors, I seem to attract people with really hard stories, really difficult stories, a lot of pain. Either they or someone around them has had, traumatic events or circumstances, or really wrestled with faith and God and church. And so we're not telling easy stories. We're really trying to tap into, changes and shifts that do need to happen in and out of the church and the way we as believers interact with people outside of the church. And then, really address some of the, abuses and harms that go on in the name of God, right? And so a lot of my clients, especially the last 2 to 3 years, have been in that space tackling topics like church hurt. And I don't mean like someone hurt my feelings. I mean like deliberate harm and abuse in a church structure. Divorce in the church, gender and sexuality, and how do you navigate that when you have someone that's in that journey? How do you as a believer support that person versus ostracize them and run them out of the church? Um, Mental health in church, so many topics that are previously considered a little bit of taboo or,
Mhm.
not comfortable to discuss in all sorts of denominations. A lot of my clients are working on. And so I think the other part of what I do, whether you're a new author or whether you're an established author, is really helping you dive deep into. I know you've written what you thought you were supposed to write, but there's also a point in your career where you need to ask God, what am I truly equipped to share and speak into? Right. If you look at the story of my life, there's always been this kind of thread running through that books can come in and show you something possible, right? Show you something different, show you hope. And they can give you practical steps, they can give you spiritual steps, and they can help you keep going just one more day in life and faith, right? That has been evident in my entire life, not just in my career, right? And so when I think of all the decisions I've made in the past about running the business, it's all boiled down to what is it that God wants me to do with this? Not just my gifts and talents, right? But my story, the way he has showed up time and time again before I knew his name, the way he healed me from severe trauma running a business, right? And I had a season where I was not really a fan of church, but I was running a Christian business, right? And so there was several years where all the books I was assigned by publishers were literally the books I needed, me personally, to take one more step in
Mm,
faith, to stay present in faith. Sometimes when I get interviewed about it, in that context, I'll say books saved me before the Bible did because they did. They kept me present and rooted in faith in a time where I was really um, dealing with a lot of trauma from being harmed in a church environment. So all I'm saying is when you, whether you're a brand new author or whether you're an established author, you need to really think through, am I writing this because I think I need to write it? Because that's what the business is telling me, that's what the world is telling me, or am I writing it because this is what God shaped me to write? Right? That's the first conversation I like to have with people is what is the mandate he's given you? The exact audience he wants you to serve, how exactly he wants you to help them is almost always built out of your own story, right?
mm,
And sometimes that story is hard and painful, and sometimes it's controversial, and sometimes it's not going to get you the worldly accolades or the publishing deal. But none of that matters if you're not doing what God told you to do. So a lot of my work involves that mandate, that mission, and that message first and foremost. Are you actually doing what God told you to do? And then utilizing that to work on things like marketing and monetization, because that's where our strongest movements come from. You know, the ministries that change the world are the ones that are holding firm to what God told them to do, despite whether they're ever
mhm.
recognized for it, if that makes sense, in a traditional way. um, and then I really think God wants us to kind of plant and water seeds of faith through our work, and He's the one that's in control of the harvest. So there's an element of understanding that multiplication of your work comes from obeying what God tells you to do. It's not necessarily the nuts and bolts of marketing, right? The marketing efforts you make don't matter if you're not actually doing what God told you to do with the message.
Ooh, there's gold there too. The marketing doesn't mean anything if you're not being obedient to God. That
It'll
that is
make you
so,
feel, yeah, it'll make you feel like you're doing a whole bunch of stuff, but it's kind of like the Mary and
yeah,
Martha story, right? It's just a bunch of busy work if it's not actually grounded in what God told you to do with your message and your story.
yeah, that's so good. And we're up against the clock here, but I want to acknowledge that a lot of those topics that you're working with people on now that, like you said, 15 years ago would have been taboo,
Mhm,
not only are people ready for those topics now they crave them. They want to know. They can't get enough of where those resources are.
mhm.
And so God's got you definitely in the sweet spot within his wheelhouse right now, because those topics are so needed. People need help, people need healing, and God always does the heavy lifting on healing, but he's always looking for resources that are going to be on. I think of Mary Magdalene and what, all the demons she was healed from, and her gratitude from that. She wanted to be with Jesus out of gratitude, and she wanted to be a vessel on that team, and she was a prominent vessel on that team. And so these authors are part of the healing team, and that's such an important work. And you've got a front row seat to much of it. Like you said, you got to read their works, and it had therapeutic effect on your own life.
Yeah.
But I love what you're doing, and I love where you've come from, even though we didn't get into all the specifics of it. I took a note, and you said there was this theme that ran through your life of safety and identity, and I think you found it, Lindsay.
Mm.
I think you definitely found your identity, and I hope you feel like you're in a safe spot at this stage in your life. I thank you for the important work that you're doing for the kingdom of God, and thank you for sharing some of your experiences with us today. Thank you for sharing your important work. We'll make sure we have the social media links where people can find you and learn more about you when we're done here with the show today. But any last words of encouragement you want to leave the viewers with today?
Yeah. I think most importantly, whether you view yourself as a writer or not, anybody that's listening to this thinking, gosh, that's what I want to do with my story, you need to give yourself permission, right? To l- understand that if you have that desire in your heart that God's given you, you can act on it. What you have to have open hands of is what the plan will look like and what the results will look like. There have been, I don't know, I have poetry and stuff that I occasionally give to friends, and they're like, "Oh, that's incredible. That helped me right in the moment." But it's not public. I write them for my friends, right? I
Mm,
don't have a published book. I have a book I'm working on at this point, but my point is like the writing first and foremost is for you, to process, your pain and understand your perspective and to understand how God showed up through it. And it does not mean it's always for public consumption. That's kind of what I call the first draft. The second draft is your healing journey. Like what was that journey like for you? And out of that can possibly come a message. And so the third draft is usually what is sent outward into the world to help people. But the hurt draft, the healing draft are usually an inward experience and an outward expression of faith. Um, the other draft is actually a gift to others. And the gap in between that, it requires a lot of identity work, a lot of story work of what is my story, where is God in it, and what does he want me to do with it? Which again is why I said earlier, I do just as much work with that mindset and mandate and mission as I do with the practical marketing. Because until you can see God in your story, no matter what it is, and which is really hard. It's hard for me. I have lots of terrible, tragic things in my past that I really wish would not have happened, right? But through the lens of perspective and faith, so many years later, I can clearly see he has woven all of it together. And this is
mhm,
my purpose on earth for kingdom work, right?
mhm.
And when you operate in that capacity, it has to come from a place of permission, of letting go of what you think it's supposed to look like and what the results are going to be, and just doing what he tells you to do. And being obedient to that is the first important step, or the most important step.
I love how you've woven in obedience through this entire interview. Thank you for that. Thank you for what you're doing for the kingdom. I wish I would have known about you when I wrote my first one 4 years ago. I could have saved myself a lot of pain in the
Mm.
process. But God's timing is always perfect, and He's always faithful. He can't not be faithful. It's part of who He is. Lindsey, this has been tremendous. Thank you so much for being our guest today and sharing with us today and giving us hope and reminding us that it all begins with obedience to God Himself. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Guys, your story's not over yet. Lindsey might have felt like at 18, part of her story, if not more than part, was over, but God was using it for good. And you might be going through a really, really hard time right now. And I'm sorry that's the case. But I assure you, God will not abandon you in that wilderness. He's not trying to crush you, He's not trying to destroy you. He's trying to teach you some things to make you a little bit more like Jesus, and so that He can make you mature, not lacking anything, and so that He can use you to help other people like He's using Lindsey to help other people now. So, thank you for watching. Thank you for being a part of our network. We appreciate each one of you. Until next time, God bless.